Cadet Mason stepped through the pressure-sealed archway into Hall 7, and the temperature dropped 3 degrees. Not because of environmental control, though it was always overcorrecting for the Thrixon's comfort, but because 37 alien eyes turned on him, and not a single one blinked. The chairs were arranged in a hexagonal pattern around a floating central podium, the floor beneath it translucent and swirling with a simulation of galactic war fronts. Overhead, rotating banners scrolled in 26 languages. Xenocultural Tactics. Week 9. Symbolism and Survival in Interstellar Conflict. Mason's boots clicked lightly against the obsidian tiles. His assigned seat far edge, Quadrant D, was occupied. Again. He stared at it. The stool had been compressed to half its height and shimmered faintly with a reactive shrink polymer, a trick native to the Oshari species. At his presence, several cadets near the center shifted. One of the Lorbith twins chittered, low and amused. Mason sighed through his nose, picked the stool up, and set it aside. Then he lowered himself to the floor, cross-legged. No words, no drama. He could hear his therapist's voice in his head. Pick your battles. Your peace is more expensive than their curiosity. He resisted the urge to rub his left shoulder. It always itched before these classes. From the center of the room, the instructor pulsed into view. Elder Vext, a Thrixon, moved like sunlight through ice. His crystalline body refracted the room's glow in jagged prisms as he approached the podium, his voice modulator humming with that high-octave clarity only Thrixon could achieve. Today's focus, Vext began, is visual legacy marks, symbolic adaptations forged in war iconography that carries the spirit of survival, defiance, or remembrance. Every species here has them. You will present yours. A quiet murmur passed through the room. Some cadets adjusted their arm sleeves, others accessed neural uplinks via wrist nodes or ocular implants. The Narani beside Mason blinked 3 times, activating a holo projector behind her left eye. Vext's many-faceted eyes turned toward the group. You will share what your people wear, carry, or embed in times of battle, not just technology, but meaning. Legacy is not equipment, it is carried in the soul and seen in the flesh. Mason kept his face still, but his pulse quickened. He already knew how this would go. First up was the Vuron cadet Jexi, who extended his forearm and activated a projected lattice of golden rings, each rotating to display bloodline symbols. These mark every warrior in my ancestry who survived battle. Those who fell the rings are broken. Next was the Gelvarn, massive and mineral-bodied. Her legacy mark was etched into her back in slow pulsing fault lines. Earthquakes in motion, her species called them. Memory shifts, encoded in tectonic vibrations. Passed down through resonance, she said. Each battle lives in our marrow. The room murmured with respectful curiosity. More presentations followed. Neural-etched war maps, glowing beneath translucent skin, animated sigils that morphed with touch, and one particularly haunting display of color-shifting memory glyphs that told an entire battlefield's emotion timeline in a gradient from pale blue to searing red. Mason remained silent, his heart thudded harder with each speaker. He glanced down at his hands, clenched in his lap. Even through the uniform's fabric, he could feel the edges of ink. Not just stories. Scars. Dates. Maps. Names. Blood he couldn't afford to forget. Cadet Mason, Vex said. He stood slowly. The room shifted just slightly, but the ripple was there. Some leaned back. One of the twins whispered something and received a brief snort in return. A few cadets already wore the thin veil of amusement he'd come to expect. Mason stepped forward, just inside the podium's edge. He said nothing. He pulled his arms from the sleeves of his academy uniform and peeled it down to his waist. His body, lean, corded with muscle, but visibly marred, became still. Silence took the room. From collarbone to waist, front and back, his torso was covered in a dense tapestry of tattoos. Not decorative, not tribal, not aesthetic. This was a living archive, layered and inked over years. Across his left pectoral, a barcode. Underneath it, tiny scripted text coordinates, barely visible without a magnifier. On his right ribcage, a field medical diagram of a punctured lung, annotated in English and Universal Common. The words, field thoracostomy, successful, 17 minutes to evac, looped under a red-inked circle. His back, 6 sets of dog tags, their numbers and call signs, woven into a tree that bore no leaves, each branch marked with the time and planetary sector of loss. Over his heart, a black and gray burn pattern. It twisted down to his hip, jagged and raw, even under the tattooed design. Unlike the others, this wasn't corrected by grafts or regen skin. It had been left. Deliberately. A tremor passed through the class, a slow, uneasy one. He used skin, someone muttered, like paper. Mason exhaled. One of the Kelnari cadets, tall, limber, with sand-colored scales, leaned back with a scoff. Art is not war. There was a beat. Laughter, brief and nervous, flickered around the ring. Mason didn't react, but his knuckles tightened. Then, Vext moved. The Thrixan elder stepped forward, unusual for his kind, and extended one glass-like digit to the barcode on Mason's side. The podium scanner pulsed. A chime rang out, sharp and immediate. The air shimmered. A hollow screen opened above them, casting a cold blue light over the room. Accessing classified medical incident log, Operation Ash Lantern, the system announced. Mason closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. Footage unspooled. Grainy, body cam-style clips from a scorched evacuation zone. Planet Venera, IX. A sky lit in orbital fire, screams, static. The camera wobbled as it panned over a makeshift medical station, a supply crate flipped open as cover. A younger Mason, bloodied and pale, crouched beside a Gelvarn casualty, missing an entire arm. Stabilizing now, the younger Mason said, voice raw. No compatible plasma using mine. The footage paused on his face, eyes glassy, sweat clinging to his skin, one side of his chest collapsed in from a broken rib. The overlay displayed internal diagnostics. Pneumothorax, rib fractures. O2 saturation, 71%. In the footage, he jammed a modified injector tube into his arm, then routed it into a rigged filtration pouch built from IV tubing, a meal pack filter, and half a drone's coolant pump. Crude, risky, effective. Someone in the class audibly swallowed. Another clip, Mason performing a needle decompression on himself, gripping a field pen like a scalpel, breath hitching as the hiss of released pressure filled the air. The video ended. Silence returned. No one laughed now. Mason slowly pulled his uniform back over his shoulders. His voice, when he spoke, was low, controlled. "These aren't decorations," he said. "They're stories I can't afford to forget." He returned to his seat, the floor, without looking up. No one dared move his stool again. By the next rotation, something had changed. The prank seat was gone. Not just restored, gone, replaced entirely with a proper chair that matched the others, except newer. The base still gleamed with the delivery serial, partially faded from a hurried installation. No one claimed credit. No one needed to. Mason arrived 10 minutes early, as he always did. That morning, the hall was already half full. Jexi, the Vuron with the ancestry rings, nodded at him. That was new. No smirk, no tilt of superiority. Just a nod. Mason returned it quietly and took his seat. The new chair didn't creak. Elder Vext hadn't arrived yet. The translucent podium still cycled idle rotations of abstract symbols. On the fourth loop, a soft shuffling broke Mason's focus. A Narani cadet, light blue skin, translucent ear veils fluttering, was leaning his way. Her name, if he remembered correctly, was Vel. "You didn't modify your epidermis for honor?" she asked, soft and careful with her comment. "No tribal right or clan decree?" Mason shook his head. "No, I did it after." "After what?" He hesitated. "Survival." Vel considered this, head tilted. "But your species heals. You could have removed the marks." "Exactly." Her face shifted an expression he couldn't place, somewhere between confusion and something like respect. Before she could ask more, the podium pulsed to life, and Vex descended again, shimmering. Today's focus will be tactical adaptation across cultural norms, interplay between symbology and behavior in multi-species units. No mention of yesterday, no nod to Mason's archive. It was like it hadn't happened, yet every glance toward him was different, more measured. The lecture began, outlining how battlefield symbols altered unit cohesion across species. Vex summoned a 3D display showing a ULC squad forming a line, their leaders' tattoos glowing with shifting indicators. The Gelvarn cadet murmured appreciation for the color-linked command hierarchy, a system incompatible with species who didn't perceive visible light the same way. Halfway through the segment, a soft chime interrupted. "Kelnari Cadet Thone," Vex said, eyes narrowing slightly. "You have requested supplemental data?" The cadet who had mocked Mason yesterday leaned forward. Tall, angular, his scales shimmered faintly with ambient heat absorption. His voice was calm, but there was a stiffness to it. "Yes, I would like to request full validation of the Operation Ash Lantern footage. I am struggling to interpret the necessity of bodily iconography." Several heads turned. Some cadets stiffened. Mason looked up, meeting Thone's eyes across the hexagon. The challenge wasn't cruel, but it was deliberate. Vex tilted his head. The footage was authenticated by Central Archive cross-reference. "I am aware," Thone said. "I question not its truth, but its intent. The marks are permanent, emotionally coded. As Kelnari, we are taught to isolate trauma and seal it. Is it efficient for a soldier to catalog agony across his body?" A few cadets looked to Mason, so did Vexed. This time, Mason stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice. "You're asking why I wear pain instead of forgetting it." Thone's gaze flickered. If pain weakens performance, preserving it is inefficient. Mason stepped toward the center, but didn't enter the podium zone. "In Ash Lantern," he said, "I made a choice to stay behind with 6 wounded when evac protocols had already flagged the site as red. My commanding officer was already dust. The secondary was a medical drone cluster that failed diagnostics mid-deployment. That's how I ended up needing a thoracostomy while directing field triage with 1 good lung." He turned slightly, indicating a line of ink across his side. "This schematic is not just memory, it's instruction. In the moment, my body remembered what panic would have erased. It's happened more than once." Vel's ear veils twitched. "You read from your own body?" "Sometimes, not with my eyes. But when your skin burns, and your hands shake, having a guide on your ribs might mean the difference between blanking out or cutting the right vein." Thone's tone lost its edge. "So, your marks are survival contingencies?" Mason nodded. "They're also grief markers. But, yes, each tattoo came after a cycle of therapy. Not at the moment. After. Once I understood what happened, and why I was still breathing." Silence returned heavier this time. Not awed like yesterday, but thoughtful, grounded. "I didn't ask for the scars," he said, softer now. "But if I've got to live with them, they may as well teach me something." Vex's crystalline gaze lingered on him longer than usual. "Return to your seat, Cadet Mason," he said. "Your insight has satisfied the query." Mason Saturday. Thone gave a nod, not deferential, but respectful. Later, in the corridor outside the lecture hall, Mason paused to adjust his bag strap. His left shoulder twinged deep muscle ache. Old injury. He flexed it gently and winced. "You missed one," a voice said behind him. He turned. Jexy stood there, watching him with a narrowed gaze. "You're back." "What about it?" "There's a small patch, left side, upper scapula, unmarked." Mason didn't flinch. "I know." "You saving it for something?" Mason didn't answer at first. He shouldered the bag and nodded once. "Yeah. For what?" "I'll know when I get there." Jexy grunted. "Symbolism. Very human." Mason half smiled. "Maybe." He walked away, the ache in his shoulder lingering. Not a wound, just a reminder. By the end of the week, something else shifted. In the mess hall, a Lorbith cadet gestured Mason over, instead of letting him drift to the edge. A Narani offered him a taste of a glowing citrus protein cube, alien, acidic, surprisingly good. A Gelvarn asked him to check the translation on a phrase she was using in an essay on battlefield empathy. No one said anything about the tattoos, not out loud. But one by one, they stopped speaking around him. They started speaking with him. By the 3rd week, Cadet Mason's name started appearing in the group sim assignments without him needing to volunteer. He noticed it when he opened the day's sim briefing, a tactical urban siege scenario on simulated Zerali terrain. 3 fire teams, staggered communication windows, language delays, and incomplete topographical data. It was a nightmare build. He'd seen worse in real life. But what caught his attention was the team roster. His name, already slotted into Team 2 as secondary medical operations and field recon. The leader? Thone. Mason raised a brow, but didn't comment. When they entered the sim chamber, the scent of electrostatic discharge filled the air. The simulation rigs shimmered under low red light. Everyone suited up in hybrid neural tactile gear. Mason slid into his exovest, adjusting the biofeedback nodes carefully along his spine. A Gelvarn instructor supervised this round, Instructor Kahl. She paced slowly before them, her voice rumbling low and steady. This simulation evaluates your ability to sustain coordination under degraded conditions. Tactical overlay will simulate audiovisual distortion. At randomized intervals, one of your team members will suffer a simulated injury. Solutions will require cultural cross-reference and improvisation. Begin when ready. Team 2 filed in. Thone approached Mason as the sim initialized. "We've analyzed your ash lantern footage," he said quietly. "You rerouted a Medrone's pump using thermal stabilizer tubing. That shouldn't have worked." Mason ran a systems check on his sidearm. "It didn't, not for long. Bought us 13 minutes. You ever simulate that before?" "No, I just knew how drone circulators worked, and I didn't want to watch someone drown in their own blood." Thone gave a short nod, then paused. "Don't let your injury record slow you. You're team critical here." Mason looked up. There was no mocking in Thone's voice. "Copy that." The simulation launched with a low-frequency pulse. The squad dropped into a tight corner of a half-collapsed city sector buildings, fragmented into jagged crystal structures. Ambient lighting flickered in pulses, mimicking unstable power fields. Wind simulation brought up fine dust that clung to their boots. Immediately, the comms distorted. Team 2. Establish signal contact, the words fractured, replaced by static. Thone clicked once in Kelnari signal code. Vel responded with an Ireni light blink. Mason flicked his hand twice and began marking the ground with adhesive signal tags, each coded to pulse a visual flare in multispectrum. He'd learned the trick during his second tour, old-fashioned, but it worked when technology didn't. 27 minutes in, Vel took a simulated chest wound shrapnel blast with arterial damage. The automed readout flickered, then blacked out. Mason dropped beside her. "No auto-diagnosis," Thone snapped. "I see it," Mason said, already kneeling. "You speak her dialect?" Thone blinked. "Not fluently." "I do. Give me cover." He pressed 2 fingers to Vel's arm, just above the simulated wound. Her pupils dilated in response. "Pain index?" he asked in Nareni. She responded with a faint finger, tap, 3 taps. "Severe." "Field sealant's useless," he muttered. "She'll crash if I wait." The sim didn't simulate blood realistically, it used heat and vibrotactile response, but it was close enough. He ran a quick thermal on her flank and mimed a compression pattern against her side. Then he took his gloved thumb and drew a quick line on his chest over his own ribcage. "Same spot," he told Thone. "Lungs collapsing. I need decompression." "With what?" "Anything tubular and stiff. Drone stylus, casing shell, old vent port." Thone dug into a tool pouch and handed over a slender metal probe. "Not sterile." "That doesn't matter. She's not real." He slipped the probe into the correct point between ribs 4 and 5 and mimicked pressure release. The vibro feedback from Vel's suit shifted to stable. She blinked 3 times. "Pain reduced." He gave a sharp nod. The team completed the simulation with 89% success rate, second highest that cycle. Instructor Kahl's only comment was a grunt, and, "You performed like you were already tired of dying." Thone clapped Mason on the shoulder when they left the sim bay. "Your lungs still hold up in pressure drops?" Mason smiled faintly. "Better than my knees." That evening, as Mason toweled off after a shower, he caught himself staring in the mirror at the empty patch over his scapula again. A little palm-sized space, uninked. For a long time, he just looked. A few days later, Vext assigned a group lecture. Each cadet was to prepare a short presentation on legacy carryover, how wartime traditions influenced post-conflict cultural practices. Mason's group had 4 cadets, himself, Vel, Jexi, and a quiet Thrixon Jr. named Elon, who only spoke through a vocal filter and mostly listened. They met in Hall 9. Jexi began with how Viren ancestry rings evolved into courtship symbology post-service. Vel described how Nareni funerary blooms used the same pigments as their military paint, a reabsorption of memory into joy. When Mason's turn came, he hesitated. He looked at the others. Then he stood and reached into his datapad. He tapped a file, then another. The screen behind him lit up not with a battlefield, but a plain black and white still, a tattoo gun. Another image, a chair, simple, scarred with use, in a small, windowless room. "This," he said, "is where I got my first one." The room was quiet. I didn't even remember what happened at first. It came back slow. Flashes. One night I woke up choking. I thought I was reliving a gas attack. Turns out it was reflux from the med patches they'd given me for sleep. I'd lost 26 hours of memory from that day. He tapped again. A photo, a blank chest. Then another, with a single date etched just below the clavicle. Getting the first tattoo hurt. Not physically, yeah, that too. But it made it real. I had to say it to the artist. Had to remember who died. Vel looked down. Jexy didn't move. Mason tapped again. Another image this time. One of him laughing, a bandage on his chest. It helped. I didn't want it to. I thought it was dumb, sentimental. But it worked. So I kept going. One for every story I didn't want buried under meds and trauma fog. He paused. This is why I carry them. Because if I don't choose how I remember, then the pain chooses for me. The group was silent when he Saturday. Elan spoke for the first time, his filtered voice low and melodic. In Thrixan record tradition, he said, only the most sacred stories are stored in a living vessel. We carve them into memory crystals that die with us. This is similar, but warmer. Mason nodded. They left together, and Jexy walked beside him longer than usual. You're not done, he said. What? Your ink, the patch, still empty. Mason didn't answer at first. Yeah, he said at last. But I think I know what goes there now. The final rotation of the term began with storm warnings over the southern arc of the station's orbital path. Windows flickered with protective shielding as micrometeor fields passed close enough to trigger proximity dampeners. Everyone felt it, a low, almost imperceptible hum underfoot, like a forgotten engine rattling deep in the bones. In xenocultural tactics, that hum carried into the tension in the air. Final presentations were scheduled for that day. Vext had explained the parameters with his usual crystalline clarity. Each cadet was to present a single item, story, or tradition that best represented their culture's emotional philosophy in war, not tactics, but ethos. It was the kind of assignment that divided the room. Some cadets were eager, proud of their lineages. Others squirmed under the weight of centuries. Mason sat quietly, watching the rhythm of anxiety and anticipation ripple through the class. He hadn't planned to speak, not again. He'd already said too much, showed too much. But the empty space over his scapula had itched for days now, like a phantom limb that knew something was coming. He didn't request a presentation slot. He didn't have to. The night before, someone had scribbled his name on the assignment board in steady, blue-coded text. There were no pranks now. No laughter. When Vex called his name last in the session, Mason stood slowly and walked to the center without hesitation. But this time, he wasn't alone. Vel stepped up first, holding out a small case. Jexy followed, carrying a thin, semi-transparent slate. Thone brought up the rear, arms crossed but his posture firm, supportive. Mason raised a brow. You three planning on presenting with me? No, Vel said, setting the case on the console. We're showing what you didn't. Inside the case, a portable projection unit. The slate lit up, displaying a split view. On one side, Mason's archive, every tattoo scanned and indexed, each tied to a report or a memory or a medical record. On the other, blank flesh. The patch on his back. Jexy tapped the blank side. This is what he left open, not for himself, for us. The projection shimmered, and the empty space began to fill. Slowly, with deliberate strokes, the class watched as a new design formed, line by line. Not ink, not text. A hybrid glyph, Vuran lines, Narani, flora, Kelnari fractal sequence, all coiling into a single shape. At the center, a new barcode. Underneath it, a date. That day's date. Mason turned, pulling his uniform top off again. He stood still as the scanner pulsed once, registering the design. The projection matched the placement exactly. I had this finalized yesterday, he said quietly. After sim cycles, after the lectures, after you. He looked at them all not with challenge, not with defiance. Just calm. This one isn't about who I lost. It's not for grief. It's for the ones who walked through the fire after and chose to stand still with someone like me. It's for what comes next. Silence. Then Vext approached, his body shimmering in refracted light. He didn't speak. Instead, he raised one finger and touched the edge of the newly scanned glyph. The podium reacted, accessing the date and code. The class waited. Nothing dramatic happened. No war footage, no burning sky, no blood-soaked triage tent. Instead, a series of images flickered into view. A field simulation. Mason crouched beside Vel, her hand on his arm. Jexi showing him Vorin ancestral codes after class, side by side on a hollow screen. Thone handing over a sealed packet labeled Ink Grade, Human-Compatible Sterile Needles. Mason, seated quietly in a medical bay, watching as an auto-ink arm hovered over his back. Instructor Vext, observing silently from a distance. These weren't battlefield moments. They were bridge moments. You turn pain into protocol, Vext said at last. Then you turn that protocol into memory. Now, you have converted memory into community. Mason didn't move. These are not decorations, Vext said, addressing the class now. They are lexicons. They are testaments. And the most human thing about them is that they evolve. He stepped back. The room remained quiet, but not because they didn't know what to say. Because they did. After class, Mason lingered. Several cadets approached not with questions but with offers. A Thrixon Jr. asked if he could integrate glyph code into his next poem. A Lorbeth said they wanted to build a tattoo template based on shared missions. Even Thune, gruff as ever, muttered something about standardizing cross-species trauma recall protocols and walked off before Mason could reply. Mason sat in the courtyard alone afterward, letting the station's artificial breeze wash over him. His shoulder ached again, but not the bad kind. He looked up. Jexi stood behind him, tossing a datapad from hand to hand. You know, the Vuran said, we've got another sim cycle next term. Real messy stuff. You in? Mason smiled. Only if you take point. Jexi laughed. I'm not that brave. Mason stretched his back gently. The new ink stung under his shirt. You're braver than you think, he said. And maybe he was, too. In a place where humans weren't expected to last, where sentiment was weakness, and scars were meant to be erased, he'd made his body speak louder than his voice ever could. He hadn't silenced the class. He'd invited them to listen. And this time, they had.